there is a growing virus that's been spreading in Latin America, and it's not the coronavirus. Deep at the heart of Latin American countries, wealth is slowly being sucked out of the economy. An increasing disparity, which is happening at a worldwide scale, has been amplified in Latin America. Take for instance one Colombian entrepreneur named David Velez, who in recent months has been grappling with a problem that most people would break themselves in half to get. He has become too rich. David Velez is the co-founder of the world's largest independent digital bank, Nubank. During the most crucial point of the pandemic, millions of people saw themselves diving into levels of poverty never seen before. Meanwhile, Velez was lucky to see the value of his stake in Nubank skyrocket as the effects of the pandemic prompted more and more Colombians, Mexicans, and Brazilians to open up online accounts. It is estimated that he is now worth a cool $5.2 billion. How is it possible that someone can amass so much wealth in one of the poorest regions of the world? We'll get to that much later on. That level of wealth would lead you to start asking a lot of questions. He has a good standard of living, all the luxuries he can possibly hope to get, and more money than he knows what to do with. Yet, around him, millions go hungry to bed every night. So what went wrong? This question is particularly important in a region like Latin America, which is home to some of the most financially unequal societies in the world. A closer look at Colombia will give us a clue to what is happening across Latin America. When you dive into poverty in Colombia, it's important to understand that it's influenced by various factors like internal conflicts, government actions, land distribution, and more. Starting in the 1960s, Colombia found itself tangled in a drawn-out internal struggle involving the government, paramilitary factions, and anti-government guerrilla groups, with drug trade money playing a major role. Peace initiations only started to gain momentum in the 2000s. It was only until late 2016 that the Colombian government officially inked a peace agreement with the primary guerrilla outfit, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Many Colombians had to leave their homes and land because of safety threats during the conflict, which made them struggle to rebuild their lives. Internally displaced people have a hard time getting back on their feet, finding stable housing or getting a job, often leading to poverty. According to the World Bank, around 5 million people were still internally displaced in Colombia in 2021. During the conflict, paramilitary groups took away a lot of land from citizens to support the drug trade. This hit the rural population hard, especially since 18% of the population in 2021 still relied on farming, causing higher poverty rates in less developed rural areas. Colombia, like many other Latin American countries, is dealing with increasing inflation due to global economic trends and the Russian-Ukraine war. In April of 2022, the country saw the highest inflation rate in 21 years, especially in food prices. The war disrupted the trade of wheat and fertilizer, leading to a 26% increase in food prices. The UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean predicts that Colombia might see a rise in poverty rates in 2023. This could result in around 880,000 people falling into poverty, the highest increase in any Latin American country. Latin America was hit the hardest by the coronavirus in terms of health and the economy. Even though they only make up 8% of the world's population, they had almost a third of all COVID deaths and went through their worst recession ever. It was a perfect example of just how bad things have gotten in a region that was once set to be a major player in the world conversation. Let's imagine something together for a moment. Imagine a region overflowing with natural resources where most countries share a language with a similar culture. It's a place with a relatively young population, decent environmental conditions, and, most importantly, a region that hasn't seen any major wars in the last 120 years. Now, doesn't this sound like an ideal place for businesses to flourish and for everyone to prosper? Well, the truth about this description is quite different. As you probably know, I'm talking about Latin America, and the reality there doesn't quite match the ideal. The economic history of this region is consistently disappointing. This needs some explanation. Latin America, like the rest of the world, has seen significant growth in recent years. However, unlike other parts of the world, every time this region revs up its economic engine, something unexpected slams on the brakes. Take a look at how differently it has progressed compared to China, not to mention the persistence of poverty, frequent revolutions, lousy public finances, and inequality. Some countries in the region still struggle with severe nutrition problems. It's baffling. All of this has caused the leading countries in the region, some of which were once wealthier than places like Poland or South Korea, to fall far behind. And the main culprit behind this economic rollercoaster is what we call populism. Populism in Latin America comes in all forms: left-wing, right-wing, civilian, military, democratic, authoritarian, and even first and second generation leaders. From Argentina's Juan Domingo Perón to Bukele's recent crypto obsession, or the well-known Rafael Correa, Evo Morales, or Hugo Chavez, history is full of leaders who promised to bring about revolutionary social justice but ended up causing more problems, including crises, hyperinflation, repression, and widespread poverty. In other words, Latin American populism almost always achieves the opposite of what it intends. So why does Latin America's economic history always seem to end in disappointment? Well, let's explore that together. Our first question is, what exactly is populism, and can we distinguish it from other political and economic movements? Are all politicians at heart populists? Defining populism precisely isn't easy, and experts have offered various definitions. One way to describe it might be that populism is when a politician seeks out power by making broad promises to the lower classes. Beyond these definitions, populism shares some common characteristics. It typically involves a charismatic leader with strong personal leadership qualities. They use polarizing rhetoric, dividing people into good and bad, the people and the anti-people. They often target elites, big businesses, banks, or institutions like the International Monetary Fund, blaming them for all social problems. For these leaders, being wealthy is considered bad and inhuman, but that's not all. Whenever they can, populists also aim to take control of public agencies, installing loyalists or making significant institutional changes. Have you ever wondered why Latin America always seems to be debating a new constitution every few years? Well, you may have probably guessed why. Just consider the past 20 years. There have been significant constitutional changes in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, a close attempt in Chile, and some minor tweaks in other countries. It's not a laughing matter. But hold on a sec, we're not diving into politics here. We're mostly sticking to the economic side of things. There's a reason why populism is important, even in economics. Populism isn't just about politics, it also comes with some economic quirks. Think about stuff like protectionism, shaking up the agricultural industry, controlling capital, nationalizing big corporations, and being a bit too generous with public spending. These are the shared traits among populists. In fact, they are so alike that some people have managed to break down the populist government's economic journey into about 5 phases. Let's call it the Latin American disease, a strategy that keeps this region in a never-ending cycle. First, before the leader grabs the wheel, the stage is set. The situation always looks pretty similar. The citizens are unhappy, the economy is struggling, prices are climbing, public services are a mess, corruption's rampant, and people feel like the social ladder has been shattered. So, frustration's on the rise, and most people are all in for a sudden change. Populism steps in, points fingers at elites and big corporations, and offers easy fixes. That's how they get into power. And once they're in, they start spending like there's no tomorrow. They rack up debts or fire up the printing presses. Take Venezuela for example. A bad economy, a 30% hike in public transport prices, and a bleak future lit the fuse for the 1989 Caracazo protests, which left over 300 people dead. That was the spark that led to Hugo Chavez's 1992 coup attempt and later his presidency in 1999. Argentina's no different. Austerity after the 2001 to 2002 crisis paved the way for the Kirchners to swoop in. Now, in the second phase, populists are at their peak. They're super popular, throwing money around like confetti, launching all sorts of social programs, and it looks like their policies are working. The economy's revving up, wages are climbing, and jobs are popping up. The gloom and doom predictions don't seem to be coming true, at least not in the short term. They're slashing public service prices, maybe even controlling prices, and it seems like life's getting better for everyone, from the middle class to the less fortunate. This is where Juan Domingo Perón, one of the founding figures of the whole populist movement, comes in with his famous line: "Give people, especially workers, as much as possible. When you think you've given them too much, give them more." He wasn't worried about the fear-mongering of economic collapse, claiming that the economy's elasticity is something to marvel at. He penned this to a letter to Chile's President Carlos Ibáñez back in 1952. And if you look at Argentina with the Kirchner's or Chavez's Venezuela, economic growth really took off in those early years. Plus, in these cases, there was a massive oil boom that pumped up public coffers, especially in Venezuela. The same story happened in Chile, growing by 9%, or Peru during Alan Garcia's first term, which saw a 12% growth in 1986. Naturally, all these successes only made the leaders more popular. Instead of boosting the economy, those populist policies seemed to be slowly tearing down the country's economic foundations. Let's break it down. The government was pushing private businesses out, messing with prices and funding their spending with debt or printing money. They were also regulating prices and controlling the money flow, which messed up the country's competitiveness. The new government-owned companies were a mess, running at a loss, imports skyrocketed and inflation got out of control, while legal security went out the window. But, you know, a populist leader will do anything to stay in power, right? We have talked about the Dutch disease before, and as it turns out, having a ton of natural resources doesn't always guarantee a smooth ride for the country. Anyway, the bottom line is that countries with these new populist leaders usually hit a rough patch pretty quickly. And that's when phase 3 kicks in. Everything goes south. Take Kirchner's Argentina, for instance. Their growing budget deficit led to crazy inflation and then a massive crisis that tanked the living standard. In Venezuela, their plummeting oil prices made their whole system unsustainable, and the country plunged into one of the worst economic collapses ever. Now, in the face of this mess, populist governments tend to double down, like pouring gasoline on a fire. More capital controls, multiple exchange rates, price controls, taxes, you name it. But it backfires. Their popularity tanks so fast that they start playing dirty, messing with the courts, media, and opposition. Corruption cases pile up as they scramble to hold power, and it just makes everything worse. In Venezuela, things got so bad that inflation hit a mind-boggling 130,000% in 2018. And here's the sad part, this isn't just a one-off occurrence. Populist cycles across Latin America have followed the same script. Look at Peru during Alan Garcia's first term. It was all rosy in 86, then recession in 88, and a crazy public deficit that led to 700% hyperinflation in 1990. Poverty soared and they had to call in the IMF for help. At this point, things are so messed up that it's time for a fresh start. Usually a new government comes in, makes tough decisions, and it's a rough ride. Poverty keeps climbing, and they often have to turn to institutions like the IMF for support. The poor usually end up worse than before the whole populist thing started, leading to more socialist unrest, and that sets the stage for the next savior to step in, and we're back to square one. Remember Evo Morales? He once said something along the lines of, if it's illegal, make it legal. Now that's quite a change from the old days. The world's changed too, with what they call second generation populism, but the cycle still goes on. A few things really stand out when you look at the differences between the United States and Latin American countries, both economically and socially. The US gained independence from Great Britain back in the late 1700s and has been all about offering loads of opportunities for its people, resulting in a better standard of living for pretty much everyone. Meanwhile, Latin American countries got their independence from Spain and Portugal in the early 1800s, but they hadn't quite enjoyed the same level of economic success or as much political and personal freedom as their northern neighbor. What's even more interesting is that many of these Latin American countries initially tried to copy the United States' way of doing things when they set up their own governments. However, more often than not, this led to a mix of political dictatorships, monopolies, corruption, and ongoing poverty for the majority of their populations. While the United States went through a pretty intense civil war in the 1860s, things have generally been pretty calm and politically stable since then. This is quite different from the numerous upheavals and political changes that have happened in Latin America over the past couple of centuries, with all their civil wars and revolutions. The United States kind of evolved from the British way of thinking. They really valued individual rights like life, liberty, and property. They were big on following the rules and keeping the government in check, and they really believed in the freedom to do business. In fact, a lot of the complaints listed in the Declaration of Independence against the British were about all the regulations, controls, and taxes that messed with the economic freedom of the American colonists. The Latin American experience was quite distinct. Imperial Spain operated as an authoritative monarchy, and it brought along some not-so-great aspects of a controlled economy and a rigid political system to its colonies in the New World. They imposed trade monopolies on agriculture, mining, and trade across their territories. all the way from distant Madrid. Corrupt imperial governors teamed up with a group of imported aristocrats who believed they held absolute power, whether you were a Native American or a colonist brought in from Spain or other parts of its empire. Life in the Spanish-American territories was highly regulated, with strict rules governing prices, wages, trade, and even who could join professional guilds. Local political power was essentially purchased from higher-ups in the monarchy's hierarchy, and once acquired, it meant complete control over those beneath you. There wasn't really a concept of rights like the British colonists had on the east coast of North America. Instead, people had certain duties to fulfill, authorities to obey, and various privileges up for grabs. Efforts were made to create more progressive governments similar to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and Argentina succeeded in doing so, becoming quite prosperous by World War I. However, the lingering influence of Spain's authoritarian past has continued to pull Latin American countries back to the old-fashioned policies. These tendencies were only reinforced throughout the 20th century, thanks to socialism, fascism, and nationalism. In the 1990s, there were some reforms aimed at more freedom and economic opportunities that led to improvements in societies and the economy. But these changes only happened because economic crises and earlier hyperinflations had pushed these nations to the edge of collapse. Even as these reforms were being implemented, the broader realm of public policy was heavily influenced by an ideology of rent-seeking, which is basically buying favors and privileges from the government to avoid market competition. There was also a pattern that often involved massive government spending and foreign-funded deficits to win over the masses. Latin America, just like many developing regions, is going to deal with some pretty tough challenges in this century. We're talking about environmental shifts, ongoing inequality, and rising violence, which are leaving lots of poor citizens in the region feeling pretty uncertain about life. Can Latin American countries step up and actually make things better for their people? That remains to be seen. So what's the big deal in the 21st century, both globally and specifically for Latin America? Well, let's start with the environment. Thanks to problems like climate change, resource shortages, and messing up our planet, the old ways we've been doing things are really changing fast. It's like the rulebook for our world is being rewritten, and the consequences are kind of hard to wrap our heads around. We might see cities underwater or just more bumpy plane rides over oceans. Plus, some heavily populated areas might become really tough to live in. Things some people need for our modern lifestyles will get scarcer and pricier. Conflict might heat up due to limited resources, and the ability to work together globally might shrink as we all huddle up in our own little groups. While it might not be the stuff of an action-packed movie, the modern world also has to worry about the man-made risks in various forms. Nowadays, pretty much everyone relies on the constant flow of money, goods, culture, and people known as globalization. This whole deal has brought loads of stuff to many people, but it's come as quite a cost in terms of our global sense of community and the environment. And all that abundance also means our basic systems for food, money, and energy are more delicate than ever. We're super reliant on far-off places to do their part, whether it's making the food we eat, running the ships that transport it with fancy fridges, or accepting some global payment that keeps the whole thing going. The one thing we should all be aware of is that no system is flawless. The more we complicate things and tie everything together, the more we risk the whole thing falling apart and leaving us high and dry. A lot of these systems depend on working institutions. It's kind of weird, but the globalized system now needs rules and organizations to enforce them more than ever. Markets need states to keep an eye on them, just like they did back in the day. Plus, the higher risk of environmental and public health disasters makes it clear that we need the states coordinating powers. Levies won't build and maintain themselves, and individual incentives won't control epidemics. Even though states have lost some power to global forces, they're still super important for providing services, keeping the peace, and verifying who we are. But here's the twist. As states deal with these outside pressures, they're also facing more and more demands from their citizens. As globalization spreads work and income around, people want more protection from their governments. The question of who's in charge is a big deal for any social system, whether it's a small city or the whole global scene. Partly as a result of globalization and partly as a result of thousands of years of shared human history, inequality has become a bigger problem for all societies. Inequality among different countries isn't just a moral concern, it also makes global cooperation on issues like climate change really tricky. This inequality leads to people searching for better lives in places where they might not be so welcome. At home, inequality makes governing even small areas a real challenge because the rewards and costs of leadership aren't spread evenly. What makes inequality especially tough to tackle is that it's partly a matter of how people perceive it. Even though the last 50 years have seen a big increase in life expectancy all over the world, they've also made the differences between societies and within them even more obvious. The old methods used by countries to reduce inequality might not work well today, and they could even make things worse. Lastly, while some say that the world has become more peaceful, the nature of violence has changed. A century ago, we thought of violence as big, organized wars, but now it takes on a less organized form. The source of violence might not look like a traditional enemy anymore, which makes it harder to identify and address threats. When rental trucks become tools for mass violence, how do you regulate all traffic? When law enforcement is outmatched, how do you ensure some level of order? As human interactions become more global and cultures change rapidly, how do we come up with new rules and norms to reduce everyday conflicts? The truth is, there's a lot to be concerned about in the world. We've created a lifestyle that's great for many people, but definitely not everyone. It's similar to what aristocrats had in the 19th century. But like them, we worry that the rules of the world are shifting, and we're unsure about how much change we can handle and how much of the old ways should be held onto. With this perspective in mind, it's easy to see how challenges of the modern world are affecting Latin America. There is hope on the horizon, however. If Latin America is able to overcome these hurdles, it would have opened a pathway to reap mind-blowing economic benefits. Do you think they'll be able to overcome it?